Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to episode 120 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of the Observer's Notebook, and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thank you for downloading and listening. The Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomenon, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it alive. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon. You can give as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can help us out by going to www.patreon, that's patreon.com/observersnotebook. And if you're interested in joining the ALPO, membership begins at only $18 a year. You can find more at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And you can also find us on Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And yes, this podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. And if you enjoy what you hear in the podcast, please subscribe and tell your friends so you'll never miss another episode of the Observer's Notebook. And now, episode 120. Enjoy. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to this edition of the Observer's Notebook. We have a special guest today, a first-time visitor to the podcast, Dave Teske. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, now before we get into our topic today, why don't you just give everybody a little background about yourself?
I am the ALPO Lunar Topographic Studies and Selected Areas Program Coordinator. Been that for about a year and a half. Enjoy doing that. I'm made 55 trips around the sun so far. I plan to do quite a few more. That's the going plan.
That's good.
Presently, I live in Louisville, Mississippi. And I'm a former public school teacher, taught science for about 25 years. That was always interesting.
Oh, my.
I'm interested in all things astronomy, especially lunar and planetary stuff. I like listening to music. I like to go camping. And in those long ago pre-COVID days, I did a lot of astronomy outreach. And I look forward to doing that stuff again someday.
Oh, don't we all? Don't we all? Now, so you're a retired teacher?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
Best
Yeah,
kind.
my wife's a retired teacher as well, elementary school. So nice. So
Yes, sir.
when did you join the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers?
I'd heard about it for a long, long time, for years and years. But I finally joined in 1993 when I got what I thought was a good planetary telescope, which was a Unitron 3-inch refractor.
Oh, there you go.
I've been a member of it.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. I thought I lost you for a minute. Okay. Since 1993, huh?
So yeah.
Okay, good.
I wonder how long people have been members, really.
Yeah, I joined back in the 70s, so I'm a few years older than you, but I joined when I was in high school.
You've been solid through there. You've been
solid since
been a member ever since
1973. Yeah. Yep. Never fell out of it.
Congratulations.
Yeah. I had years when I wasn't very active, but now with this podcast and the training program that I run, it's keeping me active. So going back in time, what sparked your interest in astronomy?
Well, I was looking at the notes for this, and I came up with a theory that I was born interested. That's my best guess. I can remember back in first grade or thereabouts, there was a nice conjunction, probably the moon and Venus. This was during the Apollo years, so I figured that was a rocket going to the moon. I was hooked by then, and a couple of years after that was all the Comet Kohoutek craze. Kind of fizzled out, but it gave a lot of excitement to astronomy. And I can remember at that time a neighbor of ours lending me a spotting scope and me trying to find things with it. I was third grade or something, but I had fun playing with it at least.
That's nice. So it was a conjunction probably that got you interested.
And no Comet Kohoutek.
And Comet Kohoutek. Very cool. And,
oh yeah.
Okay, so your first telescope was refractor.
Oh, well, yeah, I had a few what you would term junk telescopes, but in the summer of 77, I bought a 4¼ Edmund reflector telescope.
Oh, my.
I was between 6th and 7th grade at the time, and I got that $159 or whatever it was by mowing lawns.
There you go.
And so it was a good trade-off, and I ended up mowing lawns for years and years after that. Paid for college and everything doing that, but that telescope turned out to be really a nice little telescope.
Now, do you still have it?
I wish they still had them.
Oh, you don't? Okay, all right. Okay, cool. So going back,
story, it actually got stolen.
No,
it actually got stolen, and it was finally returned to me a few years later. But by then, I moved on to another telescope.
Oh, okay, all right. So looking back on your life as an amateur astronomer, is there someone that influenced you most?
A bunch of people, actually.
Yeah.
I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, of all places. Beautiful town. My family's house was very near the University of Minnesota at Duluth, or UMD. And at UMD, there was a planetarium. And as a child, I went there quite often to the planetarium shows. I remember Sunday afternoons at 2. And my dad would take me, and I was thoroughly interested. He had his nice hour-long nap, and everyone was happy at the end. But by the time I was in middle school, the director of the planetarium was a young man named Glenn Langhorst. He was then the director of the planetarium. Okay. He really got me going into astronomy. He helped me into solar astronomy, which I'm still doing gung-ho, and also into photography. He was really into that stuff. And as time went on, I graduated high school with all these interests, and I ended up going to the University of Minnesota Duluth, where that planetarium was. And he helped me get a job as the assistant director of the planetarium.
Oh, my.
And basically that meant, it was a lot of fun. It was doing hundreds of planetarium shows over a few years, mostly for the school kids in the area. Mm-hmm. And this was during the Halley's Comet time period.
Oh, popular.
So we were busy as can be. Oh, yeah. Even though in the northern part of the country, Halley's Comet was awfully difficult to see.
Right.
But, of course, it was all over in the news. Mm-hmm. And this, just being in the planetarium business, that actually influenced me to have my major as a science teacher and ultimately teaching schools.
Nice.
Around that time, I also helped Glenn Langhorst, this gentleman, establish a local astronomy club called the Arrowhead Astronomical Association, an astronomy club that is still very active today.
Oh, fantastic.
One of the early members of that group was a person our listeners may have heard of, Bob King. He was very influential on my observational astronomy skills. He is known as Astro Bob, and he has columns in Sky and Telescope magazine the last few years.
Right. Very good.
Quite an astronomer. So I feel really lucky to have known those two growing up. A little later in life, I moved to Mississippi And there was another gentleman that I met. His name was James Hill. He ran an observatory in French Camp, Mississippi, which is kind of in the middle of the state and out in the Tules. And he had an observatory there called Rainwater Observatory. And it's still there, and it's he really was a promoter of astronomy outreach, and he was a lot of fun to know. He's still going strong right now. He's a professor of astronomy up at Ole Miss.
Oh, wow. That's great. Yeah, you never forget the people that really influenced you when you start off in this endeavor. Because you really can't do it on your own. You always need someone to mentor you along the way. Yeah, that's what.
It would be a tough thing to do on your own, to say the least.
Yeah, and the astronomy clubs are especially.
I know one of your questions was about. Yeah, one of your questions was about advice for new astronomers, that sort of thing, and it's definitely find someone else and to help you along.
That's true.
It's a tough one to do alone.
That's true. Well, you're a recent addition to the staff of the ALPO as a lunar coordinator,
right?
And so, saying that, I imagine you've got a very strong interest in the moon.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I always have had a real strong interest in lunar.
Why is that?
Well, in college, one of my strong concentrations was geology. I've always liked that branch of science. You go out with just a very modest telescope and look at the moon, and you see all sorts of geology, much more than you can see in any place else in our universe outside of the Earth. And it's just fascinating. And the light is always changing. There's always something new to see. And you see things that no spacecraft has seen before because of the way the light is hitting it.
That's true. That's true. Now, are you an observational astronomer or are you an imager?
Both.
Both? Okay.
I'm torn, actually. Imaging is coming easier for me now, so I do more of that, but I sure like the going out with the telescope and just observing. That's really pleasurable.
That's good. Yeah. It's the first thing you put in your telescope when you take it out at night is an eyepiece, not a camera, right?
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah. That's good. So joining
even if nothing else, to see what the condition is.
That's true. Yeah. So the lunar section has a long history. Can you talk to us a little bit about it and the different observing sections it has within?
Oh, goodness, yes. 1 second here. Yeah, the ALPO, of course, is the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. So lunar is a big part of it. Started back in the 1940s with Haas. And where I picked up the story the best was in 1997, William Dembowski. He started a newsletter called the Lunar Observer. And he was with something called the American Lunar Society, which, to my knowledge, folded around not too long after that. But his newsletter was this quaint 2-page newsletter. It's now over 100 pages. But it was taken over by Wayne Bailey in 2008, I believe.
Right.
And Wayne Bailey was the editor of the Lunar Observer until 2019, when I became the coordinator of the ALPO Lunar Topographic Section.
Okay, so you're now the editor of the Lunar Observer.
Pardon me?
You're now the editor?
I'm now the editor of the Lunar Observer.
Great.
Yes.
And talk about that publication, because it's really well done.
Well, thank you. Like I say, it had a history of over 20 years old. And when I took over the position, my biggest fear was, well, what if people don't submit stuff to the publication? What do I do? I mean, I can only say, this is Tycho so many ways or something to that effect. And lo and behold, I have not had that worry at all. I've get, like last month, I had 28 observers all over the world contributing.
Wow.
And from 10 different countries, in fact, and 146 observations, I think I recorded. That was just last month. I pulled up the most recent month. So it keeps me on my toes.
Yeah, and it's a free publication, right? You don't need to subscribe to it?
Yes.
That's amazing. So
you don't subscribe to it. Yeah, I agree. It is on the ALPO Lunar Images Gallery website. Anyone can download it for free.
Mm-hmm.
And it also is put on cloudynights.com,
right,
where some people download it. I've seen as many as 900 looks at it per month, so that's
fantastic. Good. That's great. Yeah, it's a really good publication, and I will put a link to it. Those interested listeners that want to download copies of it, I'll put a link in the show notes, so it'd be easy to get to that way as well. Now you mentioned the Lunar Topographical Studies. What is that group?
The Lunar Topographic Studies and Selected Areas program. It collects lunar observations for upload into that gallery. Most of the observations, not all of them, are put into that ALPO Lunar newsletter, the Lunar Observer.
Mm-hmm.
The Selected Areas part of that program highlights some of the major lunar craters like Tycho and Copernicus and a few others with really detailed maps, which encourages observers to study, like, hey, how much can I see in Tycho? Can I see this feature here? That sort of thing. And that is my realm of work, is working with those things. But also with it, we had a assistant coordinator, Jerry Hubble,
mm-hmm.
who recently left us to become the coordinator of the ALPO Exoplanet section, which
yes.
just, that just sounds cool.
It does sound cool.
But a good associate of mine, Alberto Anazio, sorry, Alberto, about this pronunciation.
Yeah, he's been on the podcast
he's
too.
In Argentina. Okay. He is from Argentina. He helps with the Focus On section of the Lunar Observer. And what this does is it encourages observers to study certain targets on the moon. These targets have, in the past, have been certain craters, the 6 Apollo landing site areas, certain features like domes and rills and mountains and such. And for the last year, the Focus On, which is bi-monthly, has been about the Lunar 100, mm-hmm. which is a list of 100 lunar features compiled by Charles Wood back in 2004. Starts out really easy, like seeing the moon or light and dark areas on the moon that can be seen with the unaided eye, up to more challenging targets that require even a more modest telescope and correct lighting conditions. Every other month since May 2020, we've covered 10 of those 100 lunar targets. And they've proven to be immensely popular with our contributors, with dozens of submissions. When I say submissions, I mean images, drawings, even paintings.
Really?
And articles per issue. Yeah.
Huh.
The images speak for themselves. It's so sharp. But when you see those drawings or these pastels or these paintings, just think of how much work somebody has done.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, and the thing is, most of the objects, like you mentioned, are easily accessible to modest telescopes. So they're not, you don't need these huge telescopes. Correct. And that's the nice thing about the moon, too. It is so close to us and there's thousands of objects on the moon that are interesting to study. So it's very good. And
like you say, a modest telescope is all you need. I keep track of telescopes in what type we use each month.
Mm-hmm.
And Schmidt-Cassegrains always win.
Mm-hmm.
Followed very closely by Maksutov Cassegrain telescopes. And the traditional reflectors and refractors are down the list quite a ways, which
Really?
kind of surprises me. But most of the telescopes are between, say, 4 and 8 inches.
Okay. So
Most of the observations.
Those are easy to manage size telescopes for the amateur.
Yes.
Okay,
And
great.
you don't have to be out in the country to use it. You could use it in downtown.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about the moon. You know, I had a street light right across the street from my home, and when I was growing up, and one thing I could always depend on was the moon, and the sky was easy to see with my telescope. Now, how many observers?
That's right.
How many observers do you have on a monthly basis? Do you think that contributes to the section?
Around 30.
Around 30
on a good month,
and that's worldwide.
Yes.
Okay, and other than the Lunar Observer, are the observations published elsewhere?
All the observations go in the ALPO Lunar Image Gallery.
Okay.
So this is free for anybody. They can go to that site and look at all those lunar images.
Okay.
They all go there. Some of the images and articles do get submitted to the Journal of ALPO for publication. That's always fun to see those in there. And some of the observers work not just with, say, ALPO, but they work for the British Astronomical Association. So we see some cross between those two publications.
Okay. So you're relatively new to the lunar section. What do you see as the future of the section? Where would you like to see it go?
More beautiful and sharp images. So send them in. But when I work on lunar images in the gallery, to me, it's really amazing how much newer technology has improved the image quality from just a few years ago. You know, a new generation of cameras comes along. Mm-hmm. We get sharper images, even when you're using the same telescope, for example. So I would expect in the not too distant future, images to be even better given the same optical equipment. That's my hope. Mm-hmm. But also we have some lunar explorations that we're just touching right now. Have you interviewed Darrell Wilson?
No, I have not.
Okay. He is an ALPO member. He lives in Virginia. He's recently been doing lunar imaging in infrared and doing thermal imaging.
Oh, my.
Now, he has to have a large telescope for this. He has to use a 18-inch obsession reflector because it basically knocks the resolution way down going in the thermal imaging. Mm-hmm. But it's a fascinating addition to lunar observing. He can see what areas of the moon hold heat and radiate heat after sunset. And with that, he can interpret how smooth or how rough a terrain is, which is just fascinating.
Okay. Well,
I also think for the future of the session or section, that as cool as all this stuff is with other wavelengths and visible light, those observers who draw the moon and paint the moon, they really are most welcome. We have one member, his name is Robert H. Hayes Jr. He has contributed monthly drawings of lunar features since the 1990s.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah.
That's good. Cool. Now, is there anything else you'd like to share about the lunar section?
Yeah, there is, now that you mention it. We have the Lunar Topographic and Selected Areas program, which I coordinate. I've been doing this, like you say, for a year and a half. Mm-hmm. We do have programs associated with this, such as the ALPO Lunar Banded Craters program, where the observer will generally image a crater like, say, Aristarchus and look at the banded features of the crater. And there's a number of these craters. And then we have a little section that we devote to that.
Okay.
But besides myself with the Lunar Topographic and Selected Areas section, we have other lunar sections in ALPO For example, ALPO has the Lunar Dome Studies program that's coordinated by Ralph Lena over in Rome, Italy. Ralph is a geologist. He takes a very detailed look at lunar domes. Domes are generally small hills that are likely caused by volcanic processes which upwelled to the lunar surface. He has a team of observers which take really detailed images of these domes, and that's necessary because of their small size. He reports these domes to our pages of the Lunar Observer at times, to the ALPO Journal, and also to the British Astronomical Association Lunar Circular.
And he's actually working on classifying them too, right? Coming up with classifications for the various types of domes. Yeah.
Yes, and he's written a book, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Another one is that we have the ALPO Lunar Transient Phenomenon program that's coordinated by Dr. Anthony Cook over in Wales in the UK. And this program searches for possible changes in the lunar environment. In the past, we're talking 50 plus years ago, these were strongly believed to have occurred. Now observers, which are both visual and imagers, try to repeat these historical observations to compare modern and historical observations, because the moon takes about 18 and a half years to repeat the exact lighting that it had, tonight or tomorrow morning. If you get up and look at the moon, it won't look that way again for 18 and a half years.
I didn't know that.
So, because of the way the tilts are and all.
Right.
So if you see something tomorrow morning really strange and unusual on the moon, we're not going to be able to check you out for another 18 and a half years to be sure that, hey, is that normal for that crater, that sort of thing, to have that exact lighting. So what Dr. Cook does is he says, look at this feature at such and such time to see how it compares to this 19th century observation and such. And with that, he does a really in-depth monthly report of these features that usually is around 10 pages. That's included both in the Lunar Observer and in the British Astronomical Association Lunar Circular.
Okay.
And we have one other lunar part called the ALPO Lunar Meteoritic Impact Search Program. This is coordinated by Brian Kutnick of Houston, Texas. Of course, this program looks for meteorite impacts on the moon using video cameras. And the best candidate for this occurred during the last total lunar eclipse that I was able to see in January 20th, 2019. There was some pretty good evidence of an impact during the eclipse.
Yeah, you see little bright streaks on the moon, basically, a little flash that's recorded with the video.
Not a streak. The streak is the atmosphere.
Okay.
You'd see a dot.
A dot. Okay.
And the dot would be just a fraction of a second.
Right.
Unless, it's a really good one, but we don't.
That's true. No streaks. Very cool. Yeah.
So the ALPO does have a lot of lunar stuff with it.
That's true. It's a big part of the organization. So stepping back, knowing what you know now in amateur astronomy, what tips would you give someone that's just starting out?
I would say, first of all, be patient. One should gradually build up their skills and their interests. Don't just jump right in deeply into equipment that's too expensive that might not really be for you. Step in gently. Go gently into those waters. And when you do get interested, join an astronomy club in your local area. Join an astronomy club. Or join some national organization like ALPO or the AAVSO or whatever your interests lie. I found that very stimulating. Be social, even though we hang out in the dark. Find a group of like-minded people to share the hobby with you. And this could be like at a stargaze party where you can meet people, astronomy conferences like the ALPO conference, but someday maybe in person,
I hope
or
so.
maybe even online or in social media, where you can share observations. And I think a main one is do what you can if you're starting out.
Yeah.
Something like we mentioned before, lunar observing can be done with a very modest telescope in full light pollution.
Right.
It's fun to have those dark moonless nights for searching for galaxies, but don't use the moon as an excuse not to observe.
Hear, hear.
Which I hear too often.
Yes, so do I. Yeah, and outside of observing the moon, I think new observers need to temper their expectations and looking at other objects, because you have all these beautiful photographs of the planets and deep sky objects, and they expect they'll look like that through the eyepiece, and they don't. They don't. And it takes time to train yourself to see detail through the eyepiece as well. That's good. So
I wish new observers would learn the sky.
Yeah.
With all the go-to telescopes nowadays, you don't learn the sky as well, and that can cause issues too with your patients.
Yeah. Remember setting circles? Yeah. You don't...
Yeah, I do.
Yep. So astronomy books. Do you have
that
some?
Dates us.
Yeah, it does. Do you have some astronomy books that you have now that you've always referred to, and what are some of the astronomy books that you really enjoy?
Oh goodness, there's many I enjoy. Probably my favorite was The Stars by H.A. Ray. Do you remember that one?
Yep, sure do.
For learning constellations. That was a fun book.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I've got the position of working with the moon stuff with ALPO, the book that I use by far the most is the Lunar Atlas.
Mm-hmm.
It has been worn out the past year, because whenever people send me an observation, I put them in the ALPO Lunar Gallery, and that's organized by way of the Ruckel Atlas, something like 77 charts.
Mm-hmm.
So the binding on the book is just holding on, because I'm always flipping back and forth to find where that crater is. But on the other hand, with time, I'm getting the book pretty well memorized.
There you go.
Kind of scary.
Yeah. So do you have a favorite lunar feature? It's like the first one you'll look at just to make sure it's still there.
Oh goodness, I hope it's still there. They all are, but there's a couple features that I like looking at because they're usually visible. The straight wall, which is known as Rupsrekta.
Mm-hmm.
That's easy to see and fun to look at during various lighting conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And right in the center of the moon, or near the center of the moon, there's the Huygens Rill.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other rills right by it, the Treisnecker Rill. And these rills are old lava tubes on the moon. And they're very thin for their length. They're like 1 or 2 kilometers wide. Look out your window. You probably see 1 or 2 kilometers away.
Mm-hmm.
It's an easy walk. So from here, we can see those little features, which I think is really cool.
That's cool. All right. Is there any other information you'd like to share about yourself or experiences you've had?
I've been really honored to be a part of the ALPO Lunar program. The lunar studies have been a lifelong passion of mine, so I'm really glad I'm able to do it.
Good. Well, we're glad to have you on board on the staff. You're doing a great job.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. And you will probably
send those lunar observations in, guys.
And you'll probably be presenting a paper at our upcoming conference this August, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Something lunar, I'm sure.
I'm sure. Yeah, that's good for our listeners. That's going to be a virtual conference on Zoom, and probably a podcast. The podcast after this one that gets released is going to be a discussion about the conference and how you can get more information on it. So look for that one to drop in your mailbox as well. Well, David, how can everybody get a hold of you if they're interested in the moon?
Email me at david.teske, Teske, at alpo-astronomy.org.
Okay. And I will also put that in the show notes as well, in case people didn't write it down. They'll be able to go right there and get it. Well, David, this has been a pleasure chatting with you today. And I hope you have a wonderful night. And
thank you, Tim.
Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Will do. Thanks much, Tim. Take care.
Right. Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. I again want to thank David Teske for coming on and give us a very enlightening discussion about the ALPO Lunar Section. Please check it out. We upload a new episode of the Observer's Notebook on the 1st and 15th of every month. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, I really appreciate it if you can run over there and just give us a rating and a review. It brings more people to the podcast. You can listen to us on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, Soundcloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, and Amazon Echo. You can help support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon. You can give up to $35 a month, where you will receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. And with that, I'd like to thank the producers of this podcast, Siedentop and Michael Moyer, for their generous support of the Observer's Notebook. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. And if you're interested in getting a hold of me for topics or discussions, my email address is cometman@cometman.net or on Twitter at ObserversNBpod. Until next time, my hope is you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.